Now, we've been telling you for months how 5 forces in this country are now actively working day in and day out to damage, delegitimize, and utterly destroy Donald Trump's presidency and, of course, his agenda. So tonight, if you want to keep that agenda, it is time for you to fight what you voted for, because if these forces, the destroy Trump media, the deep state, sore loser Democrats, establishment weak Republicans, never Trumpers, if they are successful in stopping this president from keeping his promises, you, the American people, are the ones who are going to end up suffering more than Obama and in his years. So tonight it's time for the American people to draw a line in the sand, start pushing back hard and fighting for your agenda, because you deserve to get the agenda that you fought so hard for all last year and voted for on November the 8th. Now let's start with the destroy Trump media. These rigid leftist ideologues, they need to be called out and exposed for what they really are. These are purveyors of fake news, these so-called news organizations. They have gotten it wrong month after month, time after time, again and again, constantly pushing their lies and phony conspiracy theories. Now, here's the good thing tonight. President Trump's administration is now fighting back, and they're doing so in a big way. Now, over the weekend, Kellyanne Conway, following on the heels, of course, of Sebastian Gorka, Anthony Scaramucci this weekend, and others, they are refusing to put up with CNN's fake news bias. They call the network out right to their faces. This is priceless.
We're talking about Hillary Clinton again?
No,
Honestly,
we're talking
I don't have time for that.
Brian, excuse me. If you're going to talk about Russia, you're going to talk about emails, and you're going to talk about investigations, you're going to talk about...
You're actually the one that brought up Russia.
You're always going to be talking about Hillary Clinton.
I didn't bring up Russia.
No. Your network is obsessed with that.
The Russian thing is a nonsensical thing. I was there early on in the campaign. I didn't have any interactivity with Russians. I didn't see anybody have any interactivity with Russians. It is a complete bogus and nonsensical thing, and this is the stuff that happens in Washington I honestly don't like. It's Scandals Incorporated.
We know...
You guys have to manufacture these scandals to take the president off of his agenda.
All right, finally fighting back. Now, we're going to have a lot more on all of this later tonight in our mini monologue, including very important information on what you can personally do to stand up and fight for the agenda you want. But first, it is time for the American people to call for the destruction of what is a two-tier justice system in America and return to the rule of law. Now, while the destroy Trump media and the left are so busy with their witch hunt, Russia, collusion, well, there are actual real scandals and actual crimes that are completely being ignored in this country. So now, the American people, you better start demanding congressional hearings, investigations, because we can no longer ignore what is the biggest double standard I've seen in my lifetime. Let's start with Hillary Clinton. We all know she mishandled secret, top secret, classified, special access program information. She also deleted, nobody in the Trump campaign or the Trump White House deleted 33,000 emails. Nobody in the Trump campaign or the administration smashed her mobile devices with a hammer. Last week we told you about how Clinton's lawyers finally turned over to the FBI BlackBerries and other devices. Oh, but they didn't have the SIM cards in them. And her server scandal is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what needs to be investigated. All of us, we go to jail. There's Uranium One. Remember, during her tenure as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, she personally signed off on giving up to 20% of America's uranium, the foundational material for nuclear weapons, to Vladimir Putin and the Russians. A real Russia conspiracy that nobody in the media is covering. And while the people who were tied to this deal, they kicked back, what, some $145+ million. And during the same time, Bill Clinton, he doubled his speaking fees in Moscow. Now, that's actual Russian collusion. And if we're going to investigate Jared Kushner, Don Jr., this needs to be investigated. Then there's this comment from Hillary Clinton back in 2016. Take a look. She's admitting to doing the very thing the media says is so terrible. Take a look.
I am already receiving messages from leaders. I'm having foreign leaders ask if they can endorse me to stop Donald Trump.
Now, given what we know about Ukrainian election interference, that sounds like a pretty damning omission from Hillary Clinton. Is it possible that other foreign actors were working to assist her campaign? And by the way, did it go further than just endorsements? These are questions we need answers to, and these people need to be put under oath. That's plain and simple. And as we've been telling you about, there is the issue of possible Ukrainian election collusion. Now, the scandal revolves around one-time DNC operative who, along with the Ukrainian government officials, they worked during the campaign and hurt Donald Trump to help Hillary Clinton. Are we ever going to look into that? We also have the former Obama Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, influencing the FBI investigation into Hillary Clinton's server. Former FBI Director James Comey testifying that Lynch pressured him to call the investigation, and it was an investigation, a matter, which Comey agreed to do. That's a Clinton talking point. There's Lynch's 40-minute tarmac meeting with Bill Clinton only days before Comey's announcement about Clinton in that July. You, the American people, you need to demand these issues get investigated. Then, of course, I think one of the most dangerous issues America is facing is the deep state. There has been an unprecedented amount of leaks of classified, raw intelligence to the press in this country. There was a recent report, over 125 leaks in 126 days. These things need to be investigated. The only crime that we know was committed in this whole Russia collusion, wild goose chase, is the unmasking and leaking of raw intelligence about Lieutenant General Michael Flynn and given his name to the Washington Post. That is a violation of the Espionage Act. That's a felony. That's a crime that needs to be investigated. And James Comey, remember, he gives his memo to a friend to leak to the New York Times, all in the hopes it'll lead to the appointment of a special counsel, which it did. Special counsel turns out to be Robert Mueller, a guy who's now carrying out a witch hunt, a guy who has massive conflicts of interest. Here's the proof. Bloomberg reported last week Mueller is now looking into business deals conducted by President Trump and people connected to his campaign. The Wall Street Journal reported last week the special counsel is investigating Paul Manafort for possible money laundering. Mueller should be investigating who is potentially committing crimes by leaking that information to the press. These leaks have been going on for months and months and months, 7 times more than the previous 2 administrations, and nothing is being done to stop them. And aside from these potentially criminal leaks, well, Mueller has massive conflicts of interest, like when he, for example, he's interviewing the FBI director. Remember, the day before, the FBI director goes before the Senate Intelligence Committee. Oh, okay, he was talking to him, and it doesn't end there for Mueller. He's best friends with Comey, the star witness in the investigation, which could be, by the way, a violation of the law. Mueller hired members of his team who donated thousands and thousands of dollars to Democrats, Obama supporters, Hillary supporters. Look at the chart. His investigators have donated tens of thousands of dollars to Clinton, Obama, Democrats. And it gets worse. One of the lawyers on Mueller's team that he hired, he previously worked for the Clinton Foundation. Is this not beyond corrupt, a conflict of interest? You also have the fake news dossier from the opposition research firm Fusion GPS. They have ties to Democrats, Planned Parenthood. And according to reports, the dossier was originally commissioned by a Republican donor, but guess what? Eventually, a Clinton ally ended up funding the entire effort. And Christopher Steele, the former MI6 agent from Great Britain, well, he put this disgusting hit piece together, cited Russian government sources or sources that were tied to the Russian government. Then there's the law firm that has ties to both Fusion GPS and the Russian lawyer who was in the June 2016 meeting with Donald Trump Jr. Now, what's so despicable, disgusting about all of this, Democrats feigning moral outrage about the idea of Russia and collusion were all but willing to repeat information from that phony dossier that used Russian sources in many cases. Now, the Senate Judiciary Committee has subpoenaed the founder or the co-founder of Fusion GPS. His attorneys say he's going to plead the Fifth. And tonight, we want to tell you about a brand new scandal. Check out this headline from the Daily Caller. Exclusive: FBI seized smashed hard drives from Wasserman Schultz IT aide's home. Now, this comes as Fox News recently reported that Debbie Wasserman Schultz, after months of stonewalling, kind of like Hillary, is only now willing to cooperate in this Democratic IT scandal where contractors are accused of taking hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of computer equipment and may have hacked into lawmaker emails. So if you're like me, I am sick and tired of a one-way street here, a dual system of justice. We don't have equal justice under the law. Nobody in the Trump campaign gave uranium to Vladimir Putin. Nobody deleted emails with BleachBit. Nobody smashed devices with hammers. Nobody colluded with Ukraine and went to the Ukrainian embassy. So if you want your agenda passed, it's time to stand up, engage, push back against those that are trying to stop this president's agenda, which you, the American people, voted for. Everything that's been happening, all the attacks against the president, is an attempt to overturn the results of the election. Those 5 forces that we keep telling you about are all in. And on Friday, by the way, we saw once again our friend Pat Buchanan. He summed it up perfectly. They smell blood in their nostrils. This is the swamp, the sewer of Washington.
A couple weeks ago, we asked a pretty obvious question on the show. How did Maxine Waters, the Democratic congressman, get so rich? Waters has held elected office for pretty much continuously 40 years. She represents one of the poorest districts in California. Yet somehow she lives in a $4.3 million mansion in one of the richest and whitest neighborhoods in L.A., which, by the way, is not even in her own district. Now, we're not alleging wrongdoing here, but really, how did that happen? The New York Times talked to Waters recently, and here's how she responded to this show in our question. Quoting now, "I own several properties. The way me, talked about it is, what right does an African-American woman have to do well? He doesn't know anything about my investments, about the house that I've lived in for 25, 30 years. This idea of how could she afford that is racist, and I just dismiss it." In other words, we're bigots for asking the question. You surprised? I mean, what else was she going to say? By the way, it doesn't look like she's lived in that house for 25 or 30 years. Real estate records suggest she just bought it 13 years ago and has spent an awful lot since to remodel it. So again, where'd the money come from? Maybe she borrowed it from relatives. Since 2006, Waters has paid her own daughter $600,000 from campaign funds. Then there's her husband, who was once a director of One United Bank. Never heard of it? Well, in 2008, One United Bank got a $12 million taxpayer bailout after Waters encouraged the Treasury Department to take up the case. At the time, she did not disclose that her husband had worked there or that she still had stock holdings in that bank. Maybe those are the investments she mentioned. Or maybe she was referring to the more than $1 million the L.A. Times reported that her family has made by doing business with companies and people she's helped in Congress. By the way, that was almost 20 years ago. Now, some people think all this looks a little unseemly, if not criminal. One liberal group ranked Waters as among the most corrupt members of Congress. We are withholding judgment on that, despite the Congresswoman's name-calling, but we really would like a real answer. We've asked Waters to appear on this show many times to explain, and we're going to keep asking.
Right, over the past few weeks, the Trump administration has been ramping up one of the most effective tactics for combating all the fake news. They've been speaking out on the very programs that spew the misinformation and lies about the president and standing up to these pundits and so-called journalists who treat the White House with hatred and disdain. I'm loving this fight back. Watch this.
Anderson, how many minutes are we in?
Are you a TV producer now? You're concerned about how minutes we're talking?
No, I'm just disappointed again that you're falling into the fake news trap.
Okay.
You're falling into the fake news trap again, and this is sad, Anderson.
We're very happy to come and take questions from I think, an outlet that's been incredibly unfair and systematically against this president. I guess you made a business decision to do so, but we're here. We just turn on the TV and we see a one-way, non-conversation using words that are meant to deride and deny the president his due.
There's a ton of focus on what I like to call Russia fever, which is a total made-up story about the president trying to take away the legitimacy of his victory in November.
If you turn to one of your partners at Skybridge and say, hey, do you have $100,000 for bail money in case I need it? Yes. Then people are going to say, why is he talking about bail money? I mean, so the question...
That's ridiculous. Jake, that's like that's a super ridiculous hypothetical, and I appreciate you're on the fly trying to think of them. But the truth of the matter is that the president's not going to have to pardon anybody because the Russian thing is a nonsensical thing.
Finally fighting back, and members of the Trump administration, they're beginning to shine a bright light on these dark corners of this fake news industry. And now, thanks to social media, you can too. Now, remember when President Obama said this back in 2008?
I need you to go out and talk to your friends and talk to your neighbors. I want you to talk to them whether they're independent or whether they are Republican. I want you to argue with them and get in their face.
All right, I'm not encouraging you to get in your neighbor's face like former President Obama did. Liberals would say I'm calling for violence, but you can call out fake news right at the source. For example, you can tell fake news Jake Tapper exactly what you think of his interview with Anthony Scaramucci. You can do it on Twitter. Or you can message Brian Stelter, Humpty Dumpty, Jeff Zucker's stenographer, about his Russia obsession and lack of desire to be fair and balanced and point out Hillary, uranium one, and felonies she committed. And, of course, you got Liberal Joe calling the president a schmuck, a goon, a thug, and mentally unhinged. Great job, NBC. And if you don't think those remarks are appropriate, just send him a tweet. And over there, of course, you have Mika helping out the over-the-top, feigning outrage every day. Her disgusting treatment of Kellyanne Conway, very despicable. You want to take it to the next level? Write a message to their bosses. Send a tweet over to Zucker over at Fake News CNN or Andy Lack from NBC Fake News. Right now, the media is living in their little bubble. It is our job to remind them that there's an America way outside of New York, D.C., Los Angeles, and San Francisco. Tonight, technology is now making it possible for you to take your point of view directly to the source and show America's elites that the forgotten men and forgotten women of this country voted for this agenda, and they want it completed, and for them to stop lying to you. Take to the social media, and I think you're going to have a positive impact.
Is it okay to use gender-based insults as long as you're a liberal in good standing? Dumb question. Of course, the answer is yes. You can do whatever you want. We've got yet another example from today. We never get sick of these. On Monday morning, Daily Beast writer Ira Madison III tweeted out a picture of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the new press secretary over at the White House, along with the caption, "Butch Queen, first time in drag at ball." Now, for those of you who are not hip to lingo like that, he's basically suggesting that she is a bad male cross-dresser. Madison, Ira Madison III, is worth noting, is the same writer who ridiculed Jeff Sessions for having an adopted Asian granddaughter at confirmation hearings. He later deleted that tweet but has not apologized for it. And, of course, no one's asked him to because he's a liberal, so, like, whatever. It's not bad. Tammy Bruce and Ether Behrman are both radio show hosts, and they join us tonight. Thank you for coming on, both of you. So, Tammy, I mean, we could go on for hours, but, like, does anybody on the left ever get in trouble for using language that people on the right would lose their jobs over?
You know, they don't, and this is the problem. If we're going to, as minorities, going to insist that we're somehow morally superior to people, maybe it would be helpful if there was actually some decent behavior involved, right? I mean, as a gay woman, I want everyone to have equal opportunity. I want everyone to be treated decently. That's really should be the foundation of any civil rights movement, of equal opportunity, equal treatment, being able to live our lives as we see fit. And it's a good argument to make, and it's a legitimate one. But it's difficult to be able to hold that foundation if you're on the left, when in fact you then continue to be the bully. That you're the one who says, well, you stand up for women, you're going to march and you're going to make those pink caps and you stand up for every woman. But when it comes to women in the Trump administration, not only are you going to call them names, you're going to objectify them based on their appearance. And it's not just Sarah Huckabee Sanders, it's also Kellyanne Conway, who was portrayed as a Fatal Attraction type of woman on Saturday Night Live. It's all really the women who have supported the president. And part of it, I have to argue, and I'll leave with this point, is that I think there's also some religious bigotry involved here as well, that's one of the differences with these women compared perhaps to liberal women, some of whom are people of faith. But I don't think that we can ignore that.
No, I think that's right. So, Ethan, I talk for a living, so I'm interested in what the rules are. So I thought the rules were you weren't allowed to attack people on the basis of their immutable characteristics, the basis of their sex or their race. You can't make fun of that stuff. It's not funny. And yet, I don't know, I see Joe Biden refer to Barack Obama as, you know, clean and articulate, and he gets picked as VP. I see this Ira Madison character call her, you know, mock her sexuality and her sex, and yet it's like not a big deal. Why is that allowed?
Well, I mean, again, we're using a single example here of somebody who insulted.
And by the way,
Well, okay, so two examples. Well, one was from a while ago at that point. But we have an example. We have an insulter in chief right now who all the way through the campaign was busy insulting people, setting the tone for the country. He's now the president. The president does set the tone for the country, and that includes insulting people on a regular basis.
What is the argument that you're making?
What Ira said.
So what is the argument that you're making, that because Trump does it, it's okay? I mean, I thought the whole point was Trump's not supposed to do that. We're horrified that he does it. We're taking a moral stand against him doing it, but now we're doing it ourselves? Doesn't that kind of undercut the case?
Yeah, and I just, was saying that I don't agree with what Ira said. I think it's actually wrong to do that kind of a low-level, guttural criticism. By the way, if you look at his other writing on Daily Beast, this is kind of what he does, is hurl insults. He's not the most positive writer. This isn't the best example, and surely does not represent people left of center in terms of the way we speak about our political opponents. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with political violence either.
It doesn't represent the left? I mean, I don't go on social media too much because, look, I've got a job. But every time I'm there, I notice, and I'm sure you do too, both of you, that, like, the left is totally... This is like normal, Tammy.
Yeah, let me just remind everybody also, the comparison of women who are conservative to men or gay men or transsexuals, also Ann Coulter has faced that as well. I mean, it's a strange kind of homophobic, transphobic attack on women who are conservative to accuse them somehow of being men. And this is what I also find strange. My first book, interestingly enough, like 15 years ago, was about the New Thought Police, was how the racism, sexism, and homophobia live on the left, that all of this is actually projection. And at this point, and look, it's never going to end, but the Americans who are watching this program have got to realize that those who stand up and say, we're your moral betters and we're the ones you can count on, are actually the ones who are making the problem worse and are the ones who are engaging in it.
Then maybe, Ethan, we should, look, I would be happy to live in a world where nobody got fired for saying something stupid. That's not the world we live in. Liberals are always pushing people to get canned for saying something stupid. Can you agree that maybe we should all just lighten up, and I'll give this Ira Madison III guy a pass, and you know what I mean? And, like, stop crushing people who say something dumb. Are you allowed to go with that?
Yeah, I actually... Tucker, you and I agree. This is wonderful. We actually came together tonight. Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's so much overreaction that's going on with boycotts, with getting people fired. I don't agree with that. I am a believer in speech, and I think that some people need to grow a little bit thicker skin, and we need to be teaching in college something like insensitivity, so everything is not so deeply offensive.
Well, they're going to come after you if you keep talking like that, Ethan. Good luck. Thank you both. Tammy, Ethan, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.
Big day on Capitol Hill in the White House as President Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor, Jared Kushner, speaks out after his interview behind closed doors with Senate Intelligence Committee staffers. Mr. Kushner denies any collusion with the Russians in alleged campaign meddling.
Let me be very clear. I did not collude with Russia, nor do I know of anyone else in the campaign who did so. I had no improper contacts. I have not relied on Russian funds for my businesses. And I have been fully transparent in providing all requested information. Donald Trump had a better message and ran a smarter campaign, and that is why he won. Suggesting otherwise ridicules those who voted for him. It is an honor to work with President Trump and his administration as we take on the challenges that he was elected to face.
Also tonight, at the National Boy Scout Jamboree in West Virginia, President Trump took his Drain the Swamp message to a whole new level.
You know, I go to Washington and I see all these politicians, and I see the swamp, and it's not a good place. In fact, today I said we ought to change it from the word swamp to the word cesspool, or perhaps to the word sewer. But it's not good.
I'm getting the reaction he was hoping for there. Interesting, though, at the Boy Scouts. But let's start with Kushner. Kimberly, I imagine that Jared Kushner is glad to have that day behind him. He has one more coming up with the House Intelligence Committee. But largely people say, well, if this is the case, and this is what he had to say, why didn't he say it before? Because there's been several months of sort of drip, drip, drip coming out of it, and today it looks like he acquitted himself well.
Yeah, and I know that he has been wanting to, in fact, tell his side of the story, and most importantly, his goal and desire was to clear his name. He has maintained from the beginning that he hadn't, he didn't do anything wrong. There was no kind of malfeasance, misfeasance, anything of that sort, nothing nefarious, no collusion. What I do see as an attorney is that this was a very carefully drafted statement on his behalf, which I think was very good because it had several just very specific declarative statements aimed to sort of, put this to bed, to rest. So I think overall for Jared, this was a very good day, that his lawyers represented him well. And I was looking for that to see, in fact, what statements they included, how he represented himself, and now we're going to see where this goes from here. But the idea was to put a stop to it.
And Jesse, it's true that he is only responsible today for himself, right? So he doesn't have to answer for anybody else. And there was some talk that he didn't necessarily do his brother-in-law any favors, because the way he set it up is basically saying, I had no idea, I walked in late, and then here's this meeting going on, and I was like, I got to get out of here.
Or he also just told the truth, and there wasn't anything to throw his brother-in-law under the bus for. That's the other way to look at it. The Democrats never let the facts get in the way of a good scandal. They built this thing up like it was going to be this huge deal today, and then it was a mirage. I think Lester Holt broke in on NBC News and the midday programming, promising a lot of juicy stuff, and they whiffed again. The guy's a Boy Scout. Look at his face. He couldn't collude if you'd played tiddlywinks with him. I read the entire statement, all 6 pages of it. He basically got drafted into this campaign by his father-in-law. It's kind of a family duty. He didn't want him to get involved in politics.
Right.
He met 2 Russians during the campaign. 2. He shook hands with the Russian ambassador once for about 30 seconds, and then he got roped into this dumb meeting and then tried to get his tail out of there as soon as possible because it was so boring. Then during the transition, he met with 2 more Russians. Ooh! He met with the ambassador because the ambassador wanted to talk about Syria. Fine. That was 20 minutes. And then he met with the banker. Fine. About economics. Okay, so where's the scandal?
And he gave him a bag of dirt.
And that's the only dirt that he got from the Russians. I think it was soil from his family's Belarus homestead. So I don't see anything there.
What a souvenir.
Belarus. Tomato.
Now, Democrats see it differently, right? And they focus in on a couple things. Like, for example, in the statement, he says, I never relied on Russian investment for my businesses. And they're saying, oh, well, that must be a key word. But on the same day, you had Chuck Schumer and other Democrats get together and reveal a whole bunch of new slogans and their new way forward, and saying that they actually have to take responsibility for their loss because of their candidate and not because of Russia. Do you think that that was like the wrong day to do that?
No. I think Democrats have to operate on their own timetable.
And I know you wrote about this in your column today.
I did. I wrote about it in the Hill today. But I mean, the Democrats need to develop their own message. Because what's quite clear is that a substantial number of voters, not just Trump voters, really don't plan to vote in 2018 on the basis of opposition to Donald Trump. They want to see something from the Democrats that says, here's what the Democrats stand for. So I don't think that it's necessarily bad messaging. I mean, it could get lost, but how do you compete with what's going on at the White House? I mean, it's impossible for the Democrats. Never going to have the kind of blood sport scent that you have. And today you have here the brother-in-law looks like he's shoving the brother, his brother-in-law, Trump Jr., under the bus, as well as you have a situation where, despite what Johnny Cochran here said,
Jesse Cochran.
If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Right. But despite that, I mean, there's so many questions left open. I mean, he says, oh, yeah, I got together, and I don't know what we were talking about. It seems so clear to me. I never read the email chain. Never looked and saw that my brother-in-law was saying, oh, yeah, I'd love to get information from Russia, dirt on Hillary. And then he says, oh, you know what, yeah, I met with that Russian ambassador. So what if I said, let's go over to the Russian embassy and have a secure channel, a back channel communication? Oh, no, I didn't mean it like that. It was just a one-time thing. This was not a good day. He's back on his heels. He's on the defensive. And, there was a carefully tailored message, as Kimberly said, written by his lawyer. But the whole thing looks to me like, everybody pointing fingers, if not taking out knives, in the circle that is the Trump White House.
Speaking about taking out knives, we have a soundbite from Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, and then we'll get Kennedy your take on this. Ooh.
Well, the overwhelming majority of Democrats that I work with understand that there's a cloud of illegitimacy that's hanging over the White House. as a result of the possibility that there was improper or illegal collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia.
So, Kennedy, they're not. This is one of the talking points that they will always use, and to some effectiveness with their base, but it's not necessarily penetrating beyond that.
No, it doesn't, and that's reflecting in the polls right now. We're going to talk about this, obviously, a little bit later in the show. But I think, you know, when you have some Democrats in leadership saying that the Russia narrative, it's ringing hollow for a lot of voters who, you know, not only do they not see enough there in order to divert their attention from things like national security, immigration, and economic principles, but there's something about it. And I'm one of those people, I'm much more of a skeptic than you, Jesse. And I know that you believe in this president, and I admire how much you love this country. However, I do feel like there's no collusion, but there is something weird going on, and I want to get to the bottom of it. And I thought what Jared Kushner did today was, I thought he did a good job of sort of laying out point by point, as you said, some of the accusations, some of the charges that have been made in the press, some of them unfounded, and took them down one at a time. And I think that's actually a good lesson for this administration, because it's a much more logical path than just slinging insults and new adjectives at people like Adam Schiff.
And one thing, Kimberly, is that if you think about the Democrats for 8 years when they, I think, really shirked their duty to do oversight of the executive branch. The Republicans are actually doing oversight, and they're having these interviews, they're having these hearings, they're moving forward in a way that I don't think that the Democrats would have given the Republicans enough credit for that. Maybe they never will. But it is true that the Republicans haven't tried to shut down any of these investigations.
No, you're absolutely right. And it dovetails with another point I was going to make. I mean, yes, they've been transparent. They've been cooperative. You see people testifying, but that's not enough to satiate the Democrats and this lust that they have for any kind of thing, you know, Russian centered. So what I think we see here today is somebody who came forward that acts like someone who doesn't have something to hide, that wants to clear his name, which is exactly what I would do if someone was making that kind of allegation, saying conspiring and colluding with the Russians. What do we have at this point today as we sit here tonight? Absolutely zero evidence of any kind of collusion with the Russians. What we do still have are Democrats in the mainstream media very anxious to try to find something. What we do have, it appears, as a special prosecutor who actually is searching. He's in search of some kind of crime. And that, so far, nothing of Russian collusion. So now he's trying to delve and look for something and fish. And that's not how it's supposed to work, for some kind of financial misdeeds, something that he thinks perhaps that is wrong, because that's some of the background of his expertise and the team that he's brought in with him.
So you don't think the email in which Junior says, "Oh, love it, please send it. Russia has information, Hillary, please send it," and then you have Kushner seeing that email chain, or he says not seeing it but ignoring it, and then showing up at the meeting along with the campaign manager. It doesn't.
Juan, you never read the bottom of an email chain. I've sent you so many emails. You just read the subject line. You ignore everything down there.
But
Come on.
To that point, it is a little bit amateurish, and I also think that's why Don Jr. doesn't have a job in the White House.
Oh.
That is also an interesting point, Kennedy.
Here now to weigh in on all of this tonight, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, author of the #1 best-selling book, the New York Times bestseller list. Also a Fox News contributor. Newt, good evening. Good to see you tonight.
It's good to see you.
So tell me a little bit about, we've been through a lot of discussion about Jeff Sessions, first of all, and the president has made sort of a couple not so subtle digs at him over the course of today. So let's start there. Do you think that his days are numbered?
No, I'd be very surprised. Look, Sessions was the first senator to endorse Trump. I remember the very first meeting Calista and I went to, which Don McGahn hosted, but Jeff Sessions chaired it when almost no one was for Trump in Washington. Sessions stayed with Trump when he was 10 points behind during the whole taping of the conversation, about sex and all that stuff. Jeff Sessions has been loyal all the way through. You can make a good case he shouldn't have recused himself. The president certainly feels that way. But when you look at Jeff's overall contribution, when you look at the work they're doing cooperating with Homeland Security on rolling up MS-13 gangs all over America, you look at what Jeff is doing, taking on sanctuary cities and the liberal mayors who refuse to protect their citizens from criminals, there's a lot of good in Jeff Sessions, and I think it would be a big mistake for the president to in any way do anything except move forward with him.
Well, you wrote a book called Understanding Trump, and when you look at him saying things like our beleaguered AG, and then talking to the Boy Scouts about how important loyalty is, and his daughter-in-law spoke to us and basically said, look, loyalty is the main factor here, and he clearly feels that Jeff Sessions threw him under the bus when he recused.
Right. I think he thinks Jeff Sessions made a huge mistake, and I think he believes as a result of that, he's in this enormous fight with Mueller that it would not probably have existed. So he's got a strong case there. On the other hand, I would just point out loyalty is a two-way street. And there's a point here where people have to say, if a guy was with you from the very beginning and he makes one big mistake,
I hear you.
Do you really dump him? And if you do, what signal do you send to everybody else on the team?
So talk to me about the sort of changing vibe, for lack of a better word, at the White House. You've got Sean Spicer out, Anthony Scaramucci in. There's discussions about maybe Rudy Giuliani, although he shot those down a bit today, and perhaps you coming into a more sort of outside role, inside role. Are you going to take a bigger role in this administration in any way?
Look, I'm going to try to be helpful in ways that the president finds useful. I'm focused very much now on getting a tax cut bill passed and signed into law by Thanksgiving. I think that's the most important project for Republicans in the next few months and key to the 2018 election. But let me just say, I think Scaramucci is a good choice for a reason that may surprise you. Scaramucci is a New Yorker. He's a businessman. He's a millionaire. He actually he's a natural fighter. He will take some of the pressure off Trump. I think Trump has felt, the president has felt, very beleaguered. He talked about the beleaguered Attorney General. I think the president's felt beleaguered because, frankly, this thing is so totally screwed up. It is so one-sided, and it is such a witch hunt that I'm totally sympathetic to the Trump position. I think it's absurd that the Republicans in Congress have not investigated the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton 33,000 emails, all of those things. You want to talk about Russian involvement? Then let's start with the Clinton Foundation. I think it's absurd that they haven't, and have frankly gone right at the Deputy Attorney General and said, tell us what it is Mueller is investigating. He's supposed to have a law. There's supposed to be some crime here that Mueller's investigating. Tell us what it is. I think that this thing is a witch hunt. I think the people that Mueller has hired are bad people. And I think that the president has every right to be very angry.
All right, I got to go. But will you have an official role or just the way you described it, sort of helping on the outside with tax reform and other things?
I like helping. I like helping.
You're very helpful. Thank you, Newt. Good to see you.
Let me be very clear. I did not collude with Russia, nor do I know of anyone else in the campaign who did so. I had no improper contacts. I have not relied on Russian funds for my businesses. And I have been fully transparent in providing all requested information. Donald Trump had a better message and ran a smarter campaign, and that is why he won. Suggesting otherwise ridicules those who voted for him.
We don't often hear from Jared Kushner, but he was speaking to reporters outside the White House today after talking behind closed doors to the Senate Intelligence Committee. He will do so with the House Intelligence Committee tomorrow. His father-in-law and the man he works for as a senior advisor tweeted yesterday, as the phony Russian witch hunt continues, two groups are laughing at this excuse for a lost election taking hold, Democrats and Russians. Drain the swamp should be changed to drain the sewer. You heard that in his Boy Scout speech just moments ago. It's actually much worse than anyone ever thought. It begins with the fake news. And so why aren't the committees and investigators and, of course, our beleaguered AG, Attorney General, looking into crooked Hillary's crimes and Russia relations? We'll start there with our panel. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. Charles Lane, opinion writer for The Washington Post. And syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, Molly.
thought the most interesting thing that Kushner said was right there at the end when he said that this Russia conspiracy storyline that's being pushed ridicules Trump voters and makes it seem like they didn't know what they were voting for. I think this was a good day for Jared Kushner. It's a good day for people who don't think there's a lot to this Russia conspiracy story. And it was not what we might have anticipated a couple weeks ago when news first broke of that meeting. There's also another thing, though, which is that obviously Jared Kushner is not ground zero of the Russia conspiracy. But if people are interested in Russian meddling in the election, I think they need to start looking more at Fusion GPS, which is the Democratic opposition research firm that's run by a bunch of former Wall Street Journal reporters who were behind the dossier. They had ties to this meeting. They were running interference for the company that was involved in the sanctions. So there still is stuff to explore.
And he is not going to testify. He is taking the fifth, I guess.
He actually just told a bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee that he will refuse to answer questions about his dealings with Russia, so this could heat up.
Chuck, also the president tweeted today after 1 year of investigation with zero evidence being found, Chuck Schumer just stated that the Democrats should blame ourselves, not Russia. He's referring to the Senate Minority Leader talking to the Washington Post, saying when you lose to somebody who has 40% popularity, you don't blame other things. Comey, Russia, you blame yourself. So what did we do wrong? People didn't know what we stood for, just that we were against Trump and still believe that. I mean, that was quite a statement that he kind of reiterated today in this Democratic rollout of a new message.
Chuck Schumer was saying publicly there something a lot of Democrats say privately and have been saying privately ever since they lost the election. The more forthright of them, that, you know, the Democrats should never have lost this election to somebody like Donald Trump. But for many reasons, many of which were their own fault, they did. And so now what's happening is, in the middle of this, you know, scandal or whatever it is about Russia, some of the senior people in the party and their pollsters and focus group people are getting together and trying to learn some lessons from that and pivot to a positive message aiming toward winning back some seats in November of 2018. Perhaps the bad news from their point of view is what they actually produced today was pretty tentative and talked about things that are very familiar, infrastructure, minimum wage, nothing really very new. And I thought it was interesting there was nothing in it about trade. Obviously, that's an issue that divides the party because Bernie Sanders has a position almost like Donald Trump, but Hillary, of course, is more of a free trader, and they haven't resolved that internally. So here's this huge issue that really played favorably for Trump in the election, and they haven't reformulated.
Yeah, I mean, it still splits the party. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, others siding almost with Donald Trump. Your thoughts back on Jared Kushner and the detailed statement he puts out. Britt referenced it earlier, saying that if you're going to do that, you have to be pretty solid on what you're putting out there.
I thought it was a very effective statement. Look, his defense essentially is that I was a naive, inexperienced, careless at times, clueless at times, a rookie in all this. And to me, it rings true. It's not the greatest of defenses. It's not exactly the one you want to go to, but you have to in this case. And I think he comes out as a guy who's being fairly open about what he did. There are a few phrases in there that are very lawyerly, like, I never relied on Russian funds in my business. Rely is an interesting word, implying there might have been loans or other stuff we don't know about. But overall, I thought it was a good statement, and it looks like he's clean. As for Sessions, I said on Friday he was a wounded man walking. I would revise that after the tweet today about from Trump. I think he's a extremely dangerously wounded man walking, and I think it's only now a matter of time. The only reason possibly for Trump to refer to the AG the way he did is that he wants his resignation. And it seems to me he'll get it fairly soon.
Well, it doesn't. There was a rumor that the president wanted Rudy Giuliani and that he was considering him again. Giuliani said that that's not true, and Sessions says he's planning on staying on. Molly, I just want to go back to the Democrats and the rephrasing of this rollout. And what do you think that means?
I think it showed that they really do understand they have a problem with working class voters. For a lot of people in their minds, when they think of the Democratic Party, they're thinking of fringe elements, the pink hats at the Women's March or rioters in the street. And that's not very attractive to a lot of middle American voters who were persuaded by Trump. At the same time, I think they need to have a much stronger message than what they put out. It sort of compares unfavorably to what Donald Trump is already doing with his strong defense of America and the average American worker. But it is suggesting that they see that they need to fix things.